Behind every smile, a dangerous secret hides waiting to be found. We are unmasking the raw truth, one gripping narrative at a time, revealing what lies beneath the surface of everyday life. Are you ready? Subscribe now and join us as we solve the mystery.
Morning, my husband asked me not to come to his medical school graduation. I was standing at our kitchen sink washing the breakfast dishes he hadn't touched. He said it quietly, almost gently, the way you might tell someone their parking meter had expired. Casual. Practiced. Like he had rehearsed it in the bathroom mirror before coming downstairs. I think it would just be easier, he said, if you didn't come. I turned off the faucet. I dried my hands on the dish towel hanging from the oven handle. I turned around and looked at him. This man I had worked double shifts for. This man I had given up my own nursing school application for. This man whose rent I had paid for 3 years while he studied. And I asked him why. He didn't answer right away. He poured the rest of his coffee into the sink, rinsed the mug, set it in the drying rack with a small, careful click. Then he said, "The Hargrove family will be there. Dr. Hargrove is the chief of the residency program I'm applying to. His wife chairs the hospital foundation. His daughter is in my class." He paused. It's a very specific kind of world, and I just think it would be simpler. Simpler. I had been a nursing aide for 4 years at that point. I worked the overnight shift at a memory care facility 45 minutes from our apartment. I came home at 6:30 in the morning smelling like antiseptic and cafeteria coffee, and some mornings I would sit in our parking lot for 10 minutes before going upstairs. Because I was so tired I couldn't manage the stairs yet. I made enough to cover our rent, his textbooks, his grocery runs, and the insurance on his car. My own car had been sold 2 years earlier because we needed the money for a board exam prep course he wanted to take. Simpler for who, I thought. But I didn't say it out loud. I just nodded, very slowly, and I said, "Okay." He left for the ceremony. I sat down on the couch in our apartment and I cried for about an hour, and then I got up and went to my shift. What happened after that took almost 2 years to fully unfold. I want to be careful about how I tell it, because the easy version would be to say he became a different person once he started his residency. But the harder truth is that I don't think he ever was the person I believed him to be. I think I just couldn't see it clearly until the distance between where he wanted to go and where I was became too wide to ignore. The separation came 6 months after graduation. He said he needed space to focus on his career. He said we had grown in different directions. He said all the things people say when they want a clean exit and they're too cowardly to just say, "I'm done using you, and now I'd like you to disappear." I signed the divorce papers on a Tuesday. I remember because I had just come off a 12-hour shift and my feet hurt so badly I had taken my shoes off in the elevator, and I signed everything sitting on the floor of our hallway because I didn't have the energy to walk to the kitchen table. I didn't fight for much. I was 31 years old and exhausted in a way that goes deeper than sleep can fix, and I think some part of me just wanted it to be over. What I did not know at the time of signing was what he had been telling people about me. I found out almost a year later, through a woman I'll call my former colleague, who had a sister who worked at the hospital where my ex-husband had just been offered a position as an attending physician. The hospital was affiliated with the Hargrove Foundation. Yes, the same family. His career had climbed exactly the way he had planned, and somewhere along the way, in the version of his life he had been presenting to that world, I did not exist as a divorced woman who had supported him. I existed as someone who had died. He had told them Dr. Hargrove, the residency committee, the colleagues who asked about his personal life, that he had been married young to a woman he loved deeply, and that she had passed away from an illness during his first year of medical school. He described it as a tragedy he had quietly moved through, a sorrow he carried privately. It made him sympathetic. It made him sympathetic. It made him seem mature, serious, capable of depth. It made the Hargrove daughter, whose name was Meredith, fall in love with him over the course of 2 years of working alongside each other in the same department. He and Meredith were engaged. Their wedding was scheduled for the second Saturday of October at her family's estate outside of Charleston. 300 guests, a tent with chandeliers, a string quartet, the kind of wedding that gets photographed for a magazine. I want to be honest about what I felt when I first heard all of this. I did not feel rage immediately. What I felt first was a very cold, very clear kind of recognition. This was not a mistake or a misunderstanding. This was a calculation. He had looked at what I was to him: useful, loyal, tired, working class, invisible. And he had decided that the most efficient way to shed me was to bury me. Not a divorce. A death. Because a divorce left a record. A divorce meant he had a living ex-wife who might surface at an inconvenient moment. A death was cleaner. A death was a closed chapter. I had helped pay for the chapter. He had simply decided I wouldn't be in it. I thought about what to do for several weeks. I thought about it while I worked my shifts and drove home and made dinner for one and sat in my apartment in the evenings. I am not by nature a person who moves dramatically. I have never been the kind of woman who storms into rooms or makes scenes. But I am also not, as he had apparently assumed, the kind of woman who stays buried. I had documentation. That was the thing he had miscalculated. I had kept everything, not out of any anticipation of needing it, but simply because I am organized in the way that people who grow up with very little money tend to be organized. I had the lease agreements in my name. I had 4 years of bank statements showing the transfers I made to cover tuition installments, rent, utilities, his board exam prep fees. I had the receipts from the medical equipment I had bought him during his first clinical year when he said he couldn't afford a proper stethoscope. I had all of it in a manila folder in my filing cabinet, filed under his name, alphabetical. I also had our marriage certificate, our divorce decree, and a very clear paper trail of 2 people who had been very much legally alive and legally married, and then legally separated in the state of Georgia. 3 weeks before the wedding, I requested a meeting with Dr. Hargrove. I did not go to the press. I did not post anything online. I did not call Meredith or send dramatic letters to the rehearsal dinner venue. I found Dr. Tunt's Swen, Hargrove's Hospital Foundation contact, and I sent a single professional email to his executive assistant, explaining that I had information relevant to a matter of some importance to the Hargrove family, and that I would appreciate 20 minutes of his time at his convenience. He agreed to meet me on a Wednesday afternoon in his office at the hospital. I wore the blazer I had bought for my own nursing school interview. The one I had deferred twice and finally withdrawn from entirely because the scheduling never worked with the shifts I needed to keep us afloat. I carried a manila folder. I sat down across from a man who was clearly accustomed to people being nervous in his presence. And I was not nervous, because the thing about spending years being invisible is that at some point it stops feeling like a disadvantage. I told him everything. I told him the correct sequence of events. I told him the dates and the amounts and the years. I told him about the graduation morning and the dish towel and the word simpler. I laid the documents on his desk one at a time, the bank statements, the lease agreements, the marriage certificate, the divorce decree, and I let him read them without interrupting. He was quiet for a long time after I finished. Then he picked up the divorce decree and looked at the date. He set it down. He picked up the marriage certificate and looked at the date on that one too. He set that down as well. He told us his wife died. Dr. Hargrove said finally, during his first year of residency. He said it was a pulmonary condition. He was he spoke about it with a great deal of grief. I'm sure he did, I said. Dr. Hargrove looked at me across his desk for a moment. Then he said, my daughter is in love with this man. I know, I said. And I'm sorry. That is genuinely not what I want to cause her. But I think she deserves to know who she is marrying before she stands in front of 300 people and promises her life to him. He called Meredith while I was still in his office. He asked her to come in. She arrived 20 minutes later in her white coat, still clearly coming from rounds, her hair pulled back, a slight flush in her cheeks that I understood later was because she had been nervous. She had been told her father needed to speak with her about something related to the wedding, and she had assumed it was something logistical. She sat down and she looked at me, this woman she had never seen before sitting across from her father's desk with a folder of documents, and she asked who I was. My name is Clara, I said. I was married to your fiancé for 5 years. We divorced 2 years ago. I am not dead. The room was very quiet. I watched her face go through several things in rapid succession. I have worked in healthcare long enough to know what shock looks like in a person's body. The slight freeze, the recalibration happening behind the eyes, the moment where the mind is processing information that fundamentally contradicts something it had accepted as true. She went through all of it in about 30 seconds. Then she looked at her father. He nodded, very slightly. She looked back at me. She asked in a very careful voice if I could show her the documents. I slid the folder across the desk. She went through everything slowly and methodically, the way someone trained in evidence-based medicine goes through a chart. She did not cry. She did not raise her voice. She turned each page with the same focused attention she had probably been trained to give to test results, to scans, to anything that required an accurate reading rather than an emotional one. When she finished, she closed the folder and placed her hands flat on top of it. "When were you planning on telling me?" she said, and I realized she wasn't asking me. She was asking the room, the air, the version of her fiancé she had believed in until 10 minutes ago. Nobody answered that, because nobody could. I left the folder with them. I thanked Dr. Hargrove for his time. Meredith walked me to the elevator. She didn't say anything for most of the walk. And then right before the doors opened, she stopped and turned to me and said, "Did you love him?" I thought about the parking lot at 6:30 in the morning, too tired to climb the stairs. I thought about the sold car and the deferred application. I thought about sitting on the hallway floor signing papers with my shoes off. "I loved who I thought he was," I said. "I'm not sure that man ever existed." The elevator opened. I stepped in. The doors closed. I found out what happened next through my former colleague, whose sister remained at the hospital and had no particular reason to protect anyone's privacy once everything became clear. The wedding was called off 3 days before it was scheduled. The announcement went out by text from Meredith's mother to the 300 guests on a Friday evening. No explanation was given, but in the way of close communities, and the medical community in Charleston is a close one, the real story spread quickly enough. He was not fired from the hospital immediately. These things move through HR and legal processes that take time. But he was placed on administrative leave pending a review of the conduct matter, which is what they call it in those environments. Dr. Hargrove resigned from serving as any kind of professional reference or mentor. The 2 senior physicians who had written his letters of recommendation on the basis of his character, not just his clinical skills, were informed and both submitted written revisions to the hospital's records. I know this because I received a phone call from the hospital's legal department asking me to provide a formal notarized statement, which I did. I also know this because one morning about 3 weeks after the wedding date that never happened, I received a text message from a number I didn't recognize. It said only, "He tried to call my father last night to explain. My father didn't take the call. Thank you for coming to see us." MT mean. I saved that message. I still have it. I want to be clear about something because I think it matters. What I did was not about revenge. I have turned this over many times and I genuinely do not believe that revenge was the engine of it. What it was about was accuracy. He had constructed a version of events in which I was erased, not just removed from his life, which was his right, but actually, actively erased. Made to not exist, converted into a tragedy for his own use, a dead woman who could be grieved over at dinner parties and never contradicted. And I think there is something deeply specific about that particular kind of harm, the harm of being converted from a person into a narrative device that demands correction not because you want the other person to suffer, but because you want to exist again, in the record, in the truth of what actually happened. I had paid for his degree. That was real. That money came from my body, from overnight shifts and sore feet and a car I sold and an application I withdrew. Those years happened. They were mine. And I was not going to allow them to be quietly buried alongside a version of me that he had invented for his own convenience. My life after that afternoon in Dr. Hargrove's office did not transform overnight into something cinematic. That is not how it works. And I think anyone who has been through something like this would agree that the aftermath of standing up for yourself is often quieter and stranger than the moment of standing up itself. What I did do was resubmit my nursing school application. I was 33 by then, which felt both late and also, for the first time in a long time, exactly the right age. I had spent years working in care environments. I understood patients in a way that a 22-year-old applicant with good grades but no floor experience does not. I was accepted to a program that started the following January. I still worked my aides shifts through the fall. I still came home tired, but the tired felt different. It felt like it was going somewhere now rather than pooling under someone else's ambition. There is one more thing I want to say, and I've thought about whether to include it because it's the part that's hardest to explain without sounding like I'm asking for something I'm not. A few months into my first semester, I was working a weekend shift and one of my patients, A woman in her mid-70s who was sharp and funny and had been a schoolteacher for 40 years, asked me why I had come to nursing so late. I told her a simplified version. I said I had spent some years supporting someone else's career and then decided it was time to build my own. She looked at me for a moment. Then she said, "Did he ever thank you for it?" I thought about the graduation morning. The dish towel. The word simpler. "No," I said. "He didn't." She was quiet for a moment. Then she reached over and patted my hand, very matter-of-factly, the way a teacher might if you'd finally answered a question correctly after a long time getting it wrong, and she said, "Well, you know what you did. That's yours. He can't take that." I have thought about those words more times than I can count since then. Because she was right. That is what he had tried to take, more than anything else. Not the money, not the years, not even my reputation as a living person. What he had tried to take was my own knowledge of what I had done. The quiet private fact that I had shown up every day for years for someone who did not deserve it. He wanted to bury that along with everything else. He didn't get to. I passed my boards on the first attempt, on a Thursday morning in late spring. I drove home afterward and sat in my car in the parking lot of my apartment building, the same lot where I used to sit too exhausted to climb the stairs, and I stayed there for about 10 minutes. Not from exhaustion, just because I wanted to feel it. The ghost, as it turned out, had not only lived, she had graduated. If any part of this story sounds familiar, if you have been the person working double shifts while someone else's name goes on the diploma, if you have signed papers on a hallway floor and felt too tired to grieve properly, if someone has looked at what you are and decided that for their purposes you need to not exist, I want you to know this. The documentation matters. Keep everything, not because you'll need it for a dramatic confrontation in a hospital administrator's office. Though that particular day was something I will not pretend was not satisfying. Keep it because your life happened. Your effort was real. The money you spent, the sleep you lost, the applications you deferred, those things are facts. And facts do not disappear just because someone with more ambition than conscience has decided it would be simpler if they did. You were there. You know what you did. And no matter what story someone else tells about you in a room you're not in, that knowledge belongs to you. It always will.